Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The steel beam screamed as it sheared through the air, a 4-ton guillotine blade of iron slicing past Lysander's face, so close that the wind of its passage ruffled his perfectly styled hair. And for one terrifying second, the CEO of Vance Global realized that his billion-dollar empire couldn't buy him another heartbeat. Move, you suicidal prick. A hand, rough as sandpaper and large enough to crush a throat, slammed into Lysander's chest. The force launched him backward into a pile of wet gravel, just as the I-beam smashed into the concrete where he had been standing a microsecond before. The impact shook the foundation of the unfinished skyscraper, sending a tremor through the rebar skeleton of the Skirich Tower. Lysander gasped, the air knocked out of his lungs, his Italian silk suit instantly ruined by the grime of the construction site. He looked up, dazed, blinking against the harsh glare of the industrial floodlights cutting through the twilight rain. Looming over him was a mountain of a man, his silhouette framed by the sparks raining down from a welder's torch 5 floors up. He wore a stained white tank top that clung to a torso sculpted by years of hard labor, covered in a layer of dust and grease. He wasn't wearing a safety vest. He wasn't following protocol. He looked like a feral god of steel and sweat. "Are you insane?" the man roared, his voice deeper than the thunder rolling in the distance. He reached down, grabbing Lysander by the lapels of his $3,000 jacket and hauling him to his feet, as if he weighed nothing more than a bag of feathers. Who walks into a drop zone without a hard hat? Do you want to die? Or are you just that stupid? Lysander Vance, known in the boardroom as the Silver Viper for his ruthless negotiation tactics and icy demeanor, slapped the man's hands away. He straightened his jacket, though the mud stain remained. His gray eyes, usually cold and composed, burned with adrenaline and humiliation. "Do you know who I am?" Lysander hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "I am the reason you have a job. I own this building. I own the ground you're standing on." The man spat on the ground, dangerously close to Lysander's polished Oxfords. He wiped a smudge of grease from his cheek, revealing a sharp jawline and eyes the color of burnt amber. "I don't care if you own the moon, Prince. Down here, gravity is the boss. And gravity doesn't give a damn about your bank account." This was the first time Lysander Vance met Jackson "Jax" Cole, the site foreman. And in that moment, amidst the screeching metal and the pouring rain, Lysander decided he was going to destroy him. 2 weeks had passed since the incident, yet the memory of those rough hands on his chest haunted Lysander's waking hours. The Skirich Tower was the crown jewel of Vance Global, a project that was supposed to solidify Lysander's legacy and step him out of the shadow of his tyrannical father. But the project was bleeding money. Delays, equipment failures, and labor disputes were plaguing the site. Lysander sat in his office on the 45th floor of the adjacent building, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the skeleton of the new tower. He took a sip of whiskey, the amber liquid burning his throat. "Mr. Vance," his assistant, Alara, buzzed in over the intercom. "The foreman from Skirich is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Lysander's grip tightened on the glass. "Send him in." The double mahogany doors opened, and Jack strode in. He looked woefully out of place in the pristine, minimalist office. He was wearing clean work boots and a dark flannel shirt, but he still carried the aura of the job site, an energy that was raw, kinetic, and disruptive. He didn't wait for permission to sit. He simply marched to the desk and slammed a roll of blueprints down. "Your architects are idiots," Jax announced, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. Lysander set his glass down slowly, the clink echoing in the silent room. "Excuse me. The load-bearing calculations for the West Wing atrium," Jax said, tapping the paper with a callus-hardened finger. "They look pretty on paper. But with the wind shear at this altitude and the grade of steel your suppliers sent us, it'll snap like a twig in a typhoon." I stopped the pour. Lysander stood up, his knuckles white against the desk. "You stopped the concrete pour? Do you have any idea how much that costs me per hour? You are a foreman, Mr. Cole. You are paid to follow instructions, not to interpret engineering dynamics. And you're paid to sit in a chair that costs more than my car and look pretty." Jack shot back, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "But if I pour that concrete, 300 tons of structure collapses. Men die. Maybe you don't care about that, but I do. Lysander walked around the desk, invading Jax's personal space. He was tall, but Jax was taller, broader. Lysander had to tilt his head back slightly to look him in the eye. The proximity was suffocating. He could smell rain, metallic dust, and a faint, musky scent of soap on the man. It was infuriatingly masculine. "You are insubordinate," Lysander whispered, his voice silky with menace. "And you're stubborn," Jax countered, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating in Lysander's chest. He didn't back down. He leaned in closer, his amber eyes scanning Lysander's face, dropping to his lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up. "Come to the site. Tonight. I'll show you the stress fractures in the test beams. Unless you're afraid to get your shoes dirty again." It was a challenge. A gauntlet thrown. Lysander Vance never backed down from a challenge. "Fine," Lysander said, smoothing his tie. 2,300 hours. When the crew is gone. I don't want an audience when I prove you wrong and fire you. Bring a hard hat this time, princess," Jax said, turning on his heel and walking out. Lysander watched him go, his heart hammering a rhythm against his ribs that had nothing to do with anger. The construction site at night was a skeletal cathedral of shadows and wind. The city lights of Seoul twinkled far below, irrelevant and distant. The only reality was the howling wind whipping through the open girders of the 52nd floor. Lysander adjusted his hard hat, a pristine white one, and tightened his trench coat against the chill. He found Jax waiting near the unfinished elevator shaft, a flashlight in hand. "You actually came," Jax said, his voice carrying over the wind. He sounded surprised, perhaps even impressed. "I am a man of my word," Lysander replied coldly. "Show me these fractures." Jax beckoned him over to a stack of steel beams near the edge. He shone the light on the joints. "Look here. Hairline cracks. The alloy is cheap. It's too brittle for the sway of a building this high. Your supplier is cutting corners, Vance. Someone is skimming off the top." Lysander leaned in, inspecting the metal. Jax was right. The fissures were microscopic but undeniable. If they had proceeded with the build, the fatigue would have been catastrophic. A cold knot of dread formed in Lysander's stomach. This wasn't just incompetence. This was sabotage. His father's enemies? Or perhaps his father himself, testing him? Who signed off on this batch? Lysander murmured, more to himself than Jax. "The invoice says Obsidian Corp," Jax said, moving closer to shield the wind so Lysander could see better. His body acted as a warm wall against the gale. "Never heard of them." Lysander froze. Obsidian Corp was a shell company owned by his own board of directors. The betrayal tasted like ash in his mouth. "We need to go," Lysander said abruptly, turning away. "I need to make calls." "Hold on." Jax grabbed his arm. "The service elevator is acting up. We should take the stairs down to 40. "I don't have time for stairs," Lysander snapped, pulling away. He marched toward the temporary construction lift, a rattling metal cage clinging to the side of the building. "This is faster." "Vance, wait," Jax yelled, lunging after him. Lysander slammed the gate shut and hit the button. The motor whined, and the cage lurched downward. Jax barely squeezed in through the closing gate, jumping into the cage just as it began to descend. "You are impossible," Jax growled, bracing himself against the mesh walls. "I am efficient," Lysander retorted. Suddenly, a screech of tearing metal pierced the air. The cage shuddered violently, throwing Lysander into Jax. The primary cable snapped with the sound of a gunshot. The cage dropped. For 3 seconds, they were in freefall. Lysander didn't scream. His voice died in his throat. He felt Jax's arms wrap around him, pulling him tight, turning his own body into a shield. Clang. The emergency brakes engaged with a bone-jarring halt, screaming against the guide rails. Sparks showered them like fireworks. The cage swung wildly, suspended over the abyss, dangling by a single, fraying secondary cable. They were hanging precariously between the 45th and 44th floors, swinging in the wind. Silence followed, broken only by the creaking of the metal and their ragged breathing. Lysander was pressed flat against Jax's chest, his face buried in the crook of the man's neck. He was shaking, uncontrollable tremors that racked his entire frame. The ice prints had cracked. "It's okay," Jax's voice was a rumble against his ear. I've got you. The emergency brakes held. Lysander pulled back, his eyes wide and terrified. He looked down through the mesh floor. Nothing but darkness and distant city lights beneath them. We're going to die. Look at me, Jax commanded. He took Lysander's face in his gloved hands, forcing him to look away from the drop. Lysander, look at me. It was the first time Jax had used his first name. It sounded intimate, grounding. Lysander focused on those amber eyes. They were calm, steady anchors in the chaos. We aren't going to die, Jax said firmly. But we can't move much. That secondary cable is chewed up. If we rock the boat, we drop. My phone, Lysander gasped, reaching into his pocket. Don't, Jax warned. Movement. They stood there, locked together in the cramped cage, suspended in the night sky. The wind howled around them, swinging the cage gently, sickeningly. Minutes stretched into hours. The cold bit through Lysander's coat. His adrenaline crashed, leaving him exhausted and freezing. He shivered violently. You're freezing, Jax murmured. Slowly, carefully, he unzipped his heavy flannel shirt. Come here. I can't, Lysander stammered, his pride trying to surface even in the face of death. Shut up and come here, Jax ordered, but his tone was gentle. He pulled Lysander inside his open flannel shirt, wrapping the fabric around both of them. The heat radiating from Jax was overwhelming. Lysander rested his head against Jax's chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. It was the most secure he had ever felt in his life. The irony was not lost on him. He was dangling over death, held by a man he had threatened to fire, and yet he felt safe. Why are you helping me? Lysander whispered into the darkness. I've been nothing but awful to you. Jax's hand moved up to rub small, soothing circles on Lysander's back. Because you're not just the suit, Vance. I saw your face when you saw those cracks in the beam. You were scared. Not for your money, but for the building. For the work. You care about the craft. I respect that. Lysander closed his eyes. My father. He built this company on blood and shortcuts. I wanted Skirich to be different. Perfect. And now we fix it, Jax said. If we get down. If, Lysander echoed. The wind picked up, swinging the cage. The cable groaned ominously above them. Lysander clutched Jax's shirt, burying his fingers in the fabric. Jax, Lysander said, his voice trembling. If we fall. We won't. But if we do, Lysander looked up. Their faces were inches apart. In the dim light of the city below, Lysander traced the rugged lines of Jax's face. I don't want to die having only known coldness. Jax's breath hitched. The tension in the cage shifted from fear to something electric, primal. The class divide, the power dynamics, the arguments, they all dissolved in the face of the abyss. There was only the heat of their bodies and the desperate need for connection. Jax lowered his head slowly, giving Lysander time to pull away. Lysander didn't. He rose on his tiptoes. When their lips met, it wasn't soft. It was desperate, fueled by the adrenaline of survival. Jax kissed him with a hunger that consumed Lysander whole. It tasted of rain and grit and life. Lysander opened to him, his hands sliding up Jax's chest to tangle in the hair at the nape of his neck. For a moment, the swinging cage didn't matter. The drop didn't matter. Lysander was burning alive in the arms of the construction worker, and he never wanted to be put out. The cage lurched again, dropping 6 inches. They broke apart, gasping, foreheads resting against each other. When we get down, Jax whispered, his voice rough, I'm taking you to dinner. A burger place. Greasy, cheap, and delicious. And you're going to eat it with your hands. Lysander let out a shaky, wet laugh. I'll buy the place. No. Jax growled playfully, nipping at Lysander's lower lip. I'm paying. For once, you let someone else take care of you. The rescue took 3 hours. The fire department had to secure the cage with secondary lines before cutting the mesh to pull them out. When Lysander finally stepped onto the solid concrete of the 44th floor, his legs gave out. Jax caught him. He didn't let go, even as the paramedics rushed over. He kept his arm firmly around Lysander's waist, a possessive, protective weight. The flash of cameras from the street below signaled that the press had arrived. The narrative would be spun by morning. Billionaire CEO, trapped in accident. But the real storm was just beginning. The next morning, Lysander entered the boardroom of Vance Global. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing dark jeans and a black turtleneck, stark, severe, and commanding. He looked like a predator. At the head of the table sat his father and the board members who owned Obsidian Corp. Lysander, his father began. We heard about the unfortunate accident. We should halt construction until— There will be no halt, Lysander interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a diamond cutter. He threw a file onto the table. And there will be no more Obsidian Corporation. The board members stiffened. I have the metallurgical reports, Lysander continued, pacing the room. I have the invoices. And I have the testimony of the site foreman regarding the safety violations you ordered to cut costs. The foreman. His father sneered. You'd take the word of a laborer over your own blood? The doors opened behind Lysander. Jax walked in. He had cleaned up, wearing a button-down shirt that strained against his shoulders, but he still looked dangerous. He stood beside Lysander, crossing his arms. That laborer saved my life, Lysander said, looking at Jax. The look that passed between them was hot enough to melt steel. And he is the new director of operations for Skirich. Anything goes through him. If he says the steel is bad, we replace it. If he says we stop, we stop. You can't do this, a board member shouted. I can, Lysander smiled, a cruel, beautiful smile. Because if you don't agree, I release the safety report to the press. Stock prices will plummet. You'll all go to prison for negligence. Or, you let me run this company the way it should be run. Silence descended on the room. The coup was complete. 6 months later, the Skirich Tower was finished. It pierced the clouds, a needle of glass and steel that redefined the skyline. The opening gala was the event of the decade. Champagne flowed, diamonds sparkled, and the elite of the city mingled in the penthouse atrium. Lysander stood on the balcony, away from the noise. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking out at the view. It was perfect. You look bored, a deep voice rumbled behind him. Lysander turned. Jax was there, looking devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo that Lysander had personally tailored for him. He held 2 beers, cheap, domestic bottles that looked ridiculous in this setting. I hate these parties, Lysander admitted, taking the beer. He took a sip, grimacing slightly, then smiling. Tastes like sawdust. Tastes like honest work, Jax corrected, stepping closer. He rested his hands on the balcony railing, boxing Lysander in. You did good, Lysander. The building is safe. It's solid. We did good, Lysander corrected. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of Jax's jaw. The touch was familiar now, claimed. So, Jax murmured, leaning down, his lips brushing Lysander's ear. When can we leave? There's a burger joint across town calling my name. Lysander looked back at the party, the fake smiles, the shallow conversations, the world he had been born into. Then he looked at Jax, the man who had pulled him out of the sky, the man who had seen the cracks in his armor and loved him anyway. 5 minutes, Lysander whispered. Let me just say goodbye to my father. Jax smirked. Make it 2. I'm impatient. You're bossy. I'm the foreman. Jax kissed him, deep and slow, in full view of the glass doors where the guests were watching. I keep things standing. Lysander melted into the kiss. The ice around his heart permanently thawed. He realized he didn't care about the board, the stock price, or the society pages. He had built his tower. But Jax was his home. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. Or perhaps, how the wolf taught the viper to bite back. If you enjoyed seeing Lysander surrender his control to the one man strong enough to handle him, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you risk your entire career to expose your family's corruption for the person you love? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Lysander, blonde hair slicked back, sharp gray eyes, wearing ruined expensive suit, wet from rain, clinging to man 2, expression of vulnerability and shock. Man 2. Jax, muscular build, tan skin, short dark messy hair, wearing dirty white tank top and flannel shirt, protective embrace, fierce amber, eyes looking at camera. Background is open construction elevator. Cage hanging precariously in night sky, rain falling, sparks flying from broken cable, dramatic city lights below, cinematic lighting, intense atmosphere, high contrast.